is what it is.
Good evening. As you saw on the agenda, we're going to vote on the resolution that was drafted heading cyberbullying. Before we go, I'm going to go through a short presentation about what's led up to this, what we've done, what's happening nationwide at Syracuse, etc., and then we'll get to the vote. Okay, so we talk about cyberbullying. What is cyberbullying? The U.S. legal definition of cyberbullying: any harassment that occurs via the internet, cell phones, or other devices, communication devices. We talk about, and professors ever talk about, bullying is always been a problem, but this is more of a 21st century form of bullying. It's moved online. It's gone from the playground where people beat each other up and now it's moved online to where thousands of people are witnessing it, which is one of the more problems of cyberbullying. It's not just the people on the playground seeing it. It's the thousands of passive viewers that can view it online. It's the anonymity of it, of posting, of sending something where you don't necessarily know who's doing it, and combating that is much tougher than knowing who punched someone or said something on the playground. We talk about viewers, passive and active, and we'll talk about that later. A passive viewer is someone who sees something, doesn't do anything about it, just lets it go. And an active viewer to cyberbullying is someone who sees it, takes an action, says something, this isn't right, refers someone to something, or does something to help prevent it or stop it. Names. Do me a favor, raise your hand if you know or have heard of Tyler Clementi, who is the first. Fair enough. Now how about Phoebe Prince or Jeffrey Johnston? Okay, and now tell me how many of you know Jess Pennington. Okay, now the reason I do this is to show us the prevalence and the impact of cyberbullying. You have people who you've heard of nationwide. You don't really know them, but you've heard of them, you know their story. For some of you, you have no clue who Phoebe Prince or Jeffrey Johnston is. There are people from other states around the country who have had stuff happen to them. You don't know them, some not. And then you have people who you interact with on a day-to-day basis, on a social basis. You know who they are. But what I want to point out is, it doesn't matter if it's someone you interact with, you've heard of it, or you've never met. The impact remains the same. There's still something going on in their lives and around their lives. And whether you know them or you don't know them, the impact can be detrimental on something that needs to be done. Okay, let me give you an example of something. You can read this. If it's starred, I took it out because I tried to protect anonymity or the vulgarness of a message. So this first thing is something that was written. This top line was written on something, and then what happened under that is the person's name was written. Okay? So then after the person's name was written, this bottom thing was written about what that person should do to solve the situation. Okay? And you can make up your own four-letter word that starts with C. What happened is, people saw this, associated that girl's name with it, and started talking. And it went from that one little area to everywhere else, and people who she didn't even know started to come up to her and reference this post. So you can imagine the emotional impact, the mental health impact that had on that one person. Now this thing is something recent in the Syracuse community. It's called Syracuse Smuts. It was a Facebook page. How many of you know what Overheard at Newhouse is? The Facebook page. Okay, so what that is it's this anonymous Facebook page. Some people know who runs it, some people don't. You can just get on there and write what you want, something you hear that a Newhouse student says. Well, what this is it's an anonymous Facebook page where Syracuse residents, teenagers, can go on and trash other girls of the Syracuse neighborhood and school district. So what happened is this 14-year-old girl, who I took up the name and everything, got off a school bus and started getting all this stuff about her. You need to put your clothes on, blah, 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 blah. So what's happening is it's not happening just on the hill, it's happening in the neighborhood. So in order to help stop it there, they need to see someone stop it somewhere else. If it starts at Syracuse University, maybe Syracuse City Schools start. And they say, we're not going to tolerate this type of Facebook page. As of now, it still hasn't come down. Post Standard has written about it. A lot of people have written about it. They're figuring out, what do we do? Do we have precedent to look at something like cyberbullying on this? Okay, other schools. Caldwell College, you sign right onto their page. And this is what you get. Okay? Talks about the Office of President's Life, Dean of Student Life is made aware of cyberbullying harassment is taking place through the use of Caldwell College IT services and/or personal technological devices. Such actions will result in, but not limited to, judicial sanctions, community service no greater than 5 hours, residence life probation, and in some cases, housing termination and suspension expulsion from Caldwell College. That's right on their page. They've said, we know this is an issue, we're not going to tolerate it, this is what can happen. The problem is, Syracuse has no such language. It has no such stance as of now. Okay, so what's currently in place? Like I said, nada. So when we talk about harassment, this is section 2 of the Code of Conduct. Harassment, whether physical or verbal, oral or written, which is beyond the bounds of protected free speech, directed at a specific individual or individuals, easily constructed as quote-unquote fighting words, and likely to cause an immediate breach of the peace. So let me just give you background of what Judicial Affairs says. they cannot hold someone liable for harassment in the Judicial Code of Conduct unless it meets all 4 of that criteria. It has to be beyond the bounds of free speech, has to be directed at a specific individual, has to be easily construed as fighting words, and has to be likely to cause an immediate breach of peace. If it doesn't meet all 4, it's not harassment. Question?
What does beyond the bounds of protected free speech mean?
Okay, so we all know you have the right to say something, but like you can't, it's like slander, libel, that type, or libel would be written, but oral or written, slander, libel, that type of thing. You're welcome. Any questions on that?
Fighting words
Like fighting words, like if I were to take a jab at your ethnicity or something like that and use words or language that is going to cause you to say, what did you say? That's going to punch it. Those are fighting words. So something that could be such derogatory or taken derogatory where it's going to cause their fighting words. You know, like you're going to get beat. Okay, so something that we've been doing a lot of is meeting with Professor Anthony Rotolo. I talked about this. You know, he talked about what you can't expect, what you can't do. You know, you can't pull something or block something from the internet. You know, Dean Wolf talks about the same thing. You look out your window, you see the First Amendment written on your house. You can't say, no, I'm going to block this site from you. It's just not plausible. A lot of people say, well, ignore it. If you don't pay attention to it, it'll go away. I disagree. Just because you don't think about it doesn't mean it isn't there and it isn't happening. And if you ignore it, it doesn't change the impact that it has on the people that it's happening to. What you can do, Professor Rotolo talked about educating, and he talked about policy. We're going to talk about policy more tonight, but we also have educational stuff that's going on in terms of the resources available, what you can do if stuff happens, how to become a passive bystander to an empowered or active bystander. So we're going to talk about more of the education later, but policy is what we're dealing with tonight. Office of Judicial Affairs, I met with the director of OJA, Gerald Martin. He covered the cyberbullying conference he went to, which was targeted at higher education, what they could do. We talked about the U.S. government department's opinion. You'll see that in the resolution. The Department of Education Office of Civil Rights within them have an opinion which is outlined. We looked in his notes. When he first took this job at OJA, he went through the handbook and he said, this is what needs to change. And he handed it to me and he said, look at Section 2 of the Code of Conduct. And right underneath it, he wrote, cyberbullying needs to be updated. And this was years ago. And now we look at where it is now, it's more prevalent, it's more impactful, and he, as I say on the bottom, says there's a need for change as well. Okay, so this is something I found interesting. After the Tyler Clementi incident, a senator from New Jersey sponsored a bill called the Tyler Clementi Act. And schools that receive federal aid would be required to create policies to prohibit the harassment of any student, and that legislation and that policy change has to include cyberbullying as a form of harassment. The thing is, we don't know how politics work. They take extended periods of time. It hasn't been brought up. It's not passed. We don't know when it's going to be. So my opinion on this is let's not wait for that to get passed years down the road for Syracuse to take a stance on this. Okay, so what's your stance? When we talk about this educational campaign, what is your stance? That's what you ask people. You talk about the consequences, the resources. There's a campaign that's don't stand by, stand up. Targeted at, if you see it, don't stand by. Stand up and do something about it. We educate people on why it's a problem. And the goal of this is to ask everyone you see about this issue, what is your stance? And with this resolution, you have a chance to show everyone what our stance is as a student association and as a university on cyberbullying. And we'll bring up the resolution. You can read through it. Neil has words to speak before we talk about it.
all those words.
Okay, so before we get going into the debate, discussion of this is a great issue to talk about. This is what I thought, when we came in and said that we were going to be results-based or whatever results, this is exactly what I'm talking about. So first I just want to thank Taylor and Amy for the incredible amount of work that they put into these round tables, because this was not something that they sat down last night and drew up. This is something that's really been working on from the beginning of the semester, kind of coming to fruition here. We're really proud of this. What you'll see is this is unprecedented with a joint resolution between these four organizations that we're very, very excited about because this affects each of our communities differently. Obviously, for us, we're looking at every community on this campus, but each of these organizations works with a specific community, and we talk about how it affects them. So this is, keep that in mind. I think what you'll see is a very unified stance. That's an important thing when you're facing an issue that really just goes beyond, as Taylor showed us, beyond the hill. It goes down in our community and our country. It's important for us to come up and stand with a unified stance on this. So we're excited about what this is to offer. With that, I will turn it over to Taylor and Alex, if you would come down and help with running the vote on this too. And answer any questions, discussion, and we'll go from there. So why don't you answer the questions and have Alex run the